The ending of Jujutsu Kaisen was one that divided the fandom almost entirely in half, leaving hardcore fans on either side screaming at one another about how wrong their opinions were. However, I do believe that in the end, the overall takeaway that ended up quote-unquote winning was the side that professed that Gege dropped the ball. But with some time now behind us and all the hectic discourse at a lull, I wanted to take the opportunity to go back to the last few chapters and ask, was the ending for Jujutsu Kaisen really that bad? So in order to identify where all the negativity started, we have to go back to chapter 267. There's an argument to be made that the tide started to turn a ways earlier than that, like during the Sukuna Gauntlet, excuse me. But I feel that even though complaints were definitely around, the vast majority of people were still very positive and very into the story at that time. However, when the contents of chapter 267 became available to the public, that's when you could really feel the shift in public perception. It was truly a switch that took place. The reason being because this particular chapter delivered one of the most controversial story decisions in the entire series by bringing back Nobara Kugisaki. This choice, in and of itself, in my opinion, is not a bad one. Akutami always left Nobara's state of being pretty ambiguous. However, the decision to not only bring her back, but bring her back right at the tail end of the story and giving her the most pivotal role in defeating Sukuna since Gojo was something a lot of people just could not handle because, for one, it just simply didn't feel earned. And compounding on that and what it means for the overall story is that even after all the efforts of Jujutsu High, from Gojo's sacrifice to Yuta's expert planning, to Hikari being an excellent distraction, to Choso's sacrifice, etc., and etc., even after all that, they still do not beat Sukuna without the deus ex machina that was Nobara. But anyways, the following chapter, 268, only worsened the narrative surrounding JJK by having Sukuna's defeat be, well, this one is a little harder to break down because one big part of the talk surrounding the defeat of Sukuna was just people memeing him. Another was actually angry, and the final part were comprised of people admiring and praising the layers and completeness of JJK's story that were wrapped up in the final moments of Sukuna in 268. Personally, and in hindsight, I'm still somewhere between the last two. I do like the actual ending for the character. As stated before, the layers in this full circle moment for both Yuji and Sukuna are really something to be appreciative of, and the subtext is also incredible. However, I still feel, as I do back then when the chapter first dropped, that the entirety of 268 should have been about the ending of the character. Even going back and reading it, it still feels weird that the chapter about the ultimate antagonist in the series meeting his end is only 9 pages out of a 19-page chapter. Gege, I believe, could have easily replicated the magic of chapter 265 and once again made the entire chapter about Sukuna and Yuji, but this time flip it and have it more be about Sukuna's perspective. But that unfortunately just didn't happen. What fortunately did happen, though, was more of an exploration into Sukuna after his defeat and passing. He was always very interesting, and to see his final talk before walking into his new life be one of understanding and acceptance was something I think Gege handled very well. He lived his life how he wanted and arguably to its fullest extent, and after being proved wrong about his viewpoints by someone he despised to his very core, Sukuna figures that maybe in his next life he'll try it a different way. It's a simple yet profound ending for a character such as him. And during the release of the chapter where the contents lay bare, I'm about 90% sure my tune and tone were entirely different. But looking back on it now, I appreciate the character growth and acceptance of loss, in the physical and by proxy the ideological sphere as well. As far as the rest of 271 and the 2 chapters prior that basically deal with wrapping up a lot of loose ends, I don't really feel one way or the other about a lot of it. From an objective standpoint, it's okay, but it deals with a lot of characters I just could not care less about. It feeds you information about a potential future that basically goes nowhere interesting and teases the return of a character that also goes nowhere. So it's not bad, but there's no real investment from the audience for about half of the characters in the epilogue. Like, ask yourself, do you care that Kusakabe is now the current head of the new Shadow style? Do you care that Charles went back to being a manga artist? Do you care that Hagane went to Tokyo to kill cursed spirits? And this goes on and on. And I would bet to venture that the answer to most of those questions is no. I will say, however, that the final mission we see that pertains to the original 3 taking down a cursed user, no matter how mundane it was pretty great. This sequence is riddled with comedy and displays a great message from Gojo that encapsulates his character extremely well in just a few short speech bubbles, which we then see followed by Yuji carrying out the wishes of his sensei in a few short, extremely well-written speech bubbles. Now, before I close this video out and give my final thoughts, I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention chapter 271.5, which was an extra chapter released sometime after 271. This epilogue, in my opinion, doesn't really add too much, however I do think it's still a nice addition and actually deals with the characters we already have investments in. The stuff with Yuki and Yuji is genuinely great. Same goes for the stuff with Nobara and her mom. There's also a real surprising one in there that has to do with Panda and an extreme time jump where we see Yuta and Maki's grandkids. That was really more fan service than anything, but again, still welcome. After that, however, the epilogue then wraps up with how Sukuna and Urame met, which gave some much needed insight into how these two came to meet and why exactly Urame stayed by Sukuna's side this entire time and why they were so loyal to a fault. But to reiterate the question I posed at the beginning of the video, was the ending for Jujutsu Kaisen really that bad? Overall, I would say no. A lot of what contributed to the overall negative sentiment that surrounded this ending were the leaks. And I'm not even gonna touch that, because that was just a whole other beast entirely. But the mistranslations, to the rabid fandom, to the exceedingly unattainable expectations, it was just a recipe for disaster. That probably, / most definitely, clouded a lot of people's ability to be objective. But taking these final chapters as a whole and looking at what Gege was trying to accomplish, I find it hard to say that he didn't do what was needed, and he didn't do it well. There were definitely mistakes made along the way, for sure. However, he landed where he needed to land to have an ending that was solid, especially when you factor in the mental toll the series had on him as well as his health at that time. But yeah, despite some problems I myself have with it, the ending for Jujutsu Kaisen is solid. But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, with all that said, thank you all very much for watching. I hope that you all enjoyed. If you did, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe with the notifications on, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace out, everybody!